Aloha and welcome. This is your astrologer, Tom. And in this video, I want to go over 10 rules for reading a Synastry chart, partner compatibility tips. So I've done quite a number of Synastry readings, actually, what I call relationship readings. And in the relationship reading, we're looking at the Synastry and we're looking at the composite. We're looking at the Synastry from both perspectives. What is a Synastry, right? If you're not familiar with it, it's just the idea that you wrap your partner's chart around yours, and it's basically a two chart, and um, you can see how you relate to your partner, and then you can flip them and see how your partner relates to you, which is different from the composite. Of course, the composite is the energy of the relationship. So in this video, we're going to talk about the 12 rules that I like to follow for reading a synastry chart. So the first thing is a quick note about aspects. I have two videos as of right now out. Number 42, which is oppositions in synastry, a whole video on that. And number 7, which is a deeper look into what makes an aspect, and actually how to resolve the issues that come up from certain aspects. I'm not going to go into that detail in this video. I'll make a note where applicable for particular aspects to pay attention to. And if you have any oppositions in your synastry, I highly recommend you listen to video number 42. And if you just want to get a better handle on aspects to be able to tap into their actual power, as opposed to the problems that they can create, then I suggest that you look at video number 7. Okay, so the first tip here is addressing compatibility. So I have a video number 43 specifically talking about compatibility, but I just want to make this note. This is a one tip here. The goal of the synastry reading is actually to better grasp how one partner relates to the other and vice versa. It is not to determine if two people should or shouldn't be together. I don't answer the question of whether or not somebody should date somebody else or anything like that. What I do and what the synastry is helpful for is to say, hey, if two people are coming together, what are the ways that those two energies, the energies of each person, what are they, how are they going to relate? And what are the things to pay attention to get the most out of the relationship? Because things that are quote unquote problems in a synastry may actually be opportunities for two people to grow together. um, they could be things that lead the relationship to end, but they can also be things that are for the relationship to grow and the purpose of the two people coming together. And because I don't know if those two people are meant to be together or not, I can't read particular problems in a synastry or particular. I don't even label them as problems. I just say, okay, here's what this energy is, and then it either works for the couple or it doesn't. Right. So if one person is more of a homebody and the other person likes to travel a lot, I just talk about that. It's like, hey, one person wants to stay home a lot, one person wants to travel a lot, or and how's that? How do you then want to make that work? And we talk about these things. So I use it as an opportunity to bring up the things that we can talk about to better deepen the connection that the two people have. Because I've seen things that look like they may not work, but for one couple they work, another couple they don't, and it's just a matter of that discussion and what that couple wants. Okay, number 2 is actually the elements. So what I like to do is look at, if you take the 10 planets and you you take the signs that they're in, and as a result of the signs, you actually figure out which element they're in, and you get the count of the number of planets in a particular element, right? So how many planets are in a fire sign, how many planets are in an earth sign, how many planets are in an air sign, how many planets are in a water sign. What I tend to find with couples is either the elements are very similar between the two people, in which case you're actually learning the opposite elements together. Okay, so maybe they have fire and earth strong on both parties, and then they're learning air and water together, or they're opposite. So maybe somebody's actually strong in fire and earth, and the other person is strong in air and water. Then what they're actually doing is learning the other elements from each other, right? So they're either learning the opposite elements together, or they're learning the other elements from each other. Those are two very common scenarios that I run into, and both can work. And so it's helpful to explain the idea of these elements, right? What might think, like, if somebody's really good at fire and earth, right? Maybe they're good at the big picture idea, and maybe they're good at doing things in the tangible world, but the thoughts and the emotions, not really solid there. They're still learning that stuff. But if the partner is good with thoughts and emotions, then they're learning how to harmonize between those two. And if the partner is equally good at fire and earth, then together they're going to have to communicate and they're going to have to express their feelings together. They're going to have to learn these things to grow and cultivate the relationship. So it's very important to point out the elements. And then, of course, we have the moon, number 3 here. The moon, of course, the emotions and time perception. So for some moons, they like a more fast paced environment. Some moons like a little bit slower paced environment, that type of thing. And so I like to look at the moon making key aspects with personal planets. So the moon making conjunction, opposition, square, conjunction, opposition, square, trine, sextile, or quincunx with Sun, Mercury, Venus, or Mars. Um, I like to consider that because this is going to when I'm looking at it in synastry, it's how does the person feel and how do they express their emotions with the other. Some are a little bit more internal. I also look at whether the moon is above or below the horizon. Some will feel more internal, some will openly express more. And so the other question is really what to say or do if you're in the moon, if you're in your moon, what do you want from your partner? And then as the partner, right, what do you want from your partner as well, right? So what does my partner want from me if my partner's in the moon, and what do I want from my partner if I'm in my moon? So if the emotions are up, if things are going on, right? Because some people want to be left alone, and some people need that comfort, right? So, and a variety of other things, right? So it's important to figure out what it is that the two people need. Then we have Mercury, which of course is communication, ideas, and thoughts. I still look at key aspects with personal planets, just like I would with the moon. I did a video number 38, specifically talking about the different ways that people communicate, looking at the different ways that Mercury operates. I think that would be a very value add video. Um, and then, really, how does one person process and express the words and ideas that are in their mind? And another way of looking at this is how do you know the meaning behind the words being said? Some Mercury's, like a Mercury in Cancer, really feels the words, has to communicate with. They actually feel into the words. The words are not just they're not just words. There's a feeling associated to every word, and they process ever so quickly, but they process if the feeling with it. Versus the opposite sign, Mercury in Capricorn, much more tangible, logical, factual, pretty much no emotion there either. Um, Mercury in Aquarius. I mean, Mercury in Aquarius has deep thought, novel ideas, but it's very much detached from any emotion as well. So even, um, even well, actually, a Mercury in Cancer to a Mercury in Aquarius would be an inconjunct, and as I talk about in the aspects video, I actually often consider that to be more can be more of a problem in inconjunct than an opposition, because an inconjunct is a different element, sign, and modality and polarity. So, so all the variables are different. But anyway, so yeah, so if you have somebody who's a Mercury in Cancer with a Mercury in Aquarius, very, very different communication style. A Mercury in Cancer to Mercury in Capricorn can work if the Capricorn person recognizes the feeling that the words elicit, and if the Mercury in Cancer recognizes the tangibility, like answering, okay, why are you telling me this, right? If you're talking to the Capricorn, Mercury in Capricorn. So, um, very, very important communication styles. Then number 5, the Venus is, of course, how someone loves. It's also showing love, receiving love, and can relate to money and beauty and how the person feels as a result of it. So some of these signs that it's like they open up a little bit to express their love and they can close down pretty quickly. Other signs are pretty open and free with their love and their expression, and some are just kind of just more methodical in nature. And so the key here, like if you take a Venus and Gemini is going to want to talk to their partner to it's a way that they actually feel the love with their partner, right? Whereas Venus and Sag, the opposite sign, might it's like if their partner helps support their purpose, supports their greater ideas, and the partner just kind of, just goes along with things and allows their partner to be free, right? that's basically then how they can feel it. It's kind of ironic because because they are they are the opposite signs in that regard, and so as a result, the person who wa- wants to feel the connection through the communication, and the other person wants to feel the connection by having the freedom. The key here that I like to look for is basically ways that they know that they're loved, ways that they want to express their love. So, somebody who has, let's say, a Mercury in Cancer and a Venus in Gemini, they're going to want to communicate to their partner, and they're going to feel even more into that. Whereas if somebody has a Venus in Sag and a Mercury in Capricorn, it's a much more give me something that allows me to be free. Let me do something that's much more tangible, much more practical. They're very different, right? So the Venuses and the Mercuries are opposite, which is why I made a whole video on oppositions and synastry, as I mentioned earlier, because these things come up quite a bit. Because many times in synastry, in relationships, you're learning either the same either the opposite thing together. Like I said, for the elements, you're either learning the opposite thing together, or you're learning the opposite from the partner. So it makes sense why a partner who has say a Mercury in Capricorn manifests a partner who has a Mercury in Cancer, and a partner who has a Venus in Sag manifests a partner who has a Venus in Gemini, right? I mean, it makes sense because in that path, you're learning the opposite elements from each other. Okay. Then of course we have the sun. The sun I actually pay less attention to in synastry, but the key that I want to look at here is whether they're going to end up going in the same or different directions. Both can work. So let's say you have two people who have Capricorn moon, and I mean, let's say one has a sun in Cancer and one has a sun in Capricorn. So there's a few other aspects going on there because if they both have a Capricorn moon and one has a sun in Capricorn, then the partner's moon sits on the sun, and that's actually a pretty strong conjunction in synastry. However, if you have something like one has a sun in Cancer, one has a sun in Capricorn, even if they're starting both with the moon in Capricorn, the idea here then is maybe one partner is going to gravitate more toward the family, and one partner is going to gravitate more toward work, right? The Cancer sun gravitating more toward family, nurturing, caring, creativity, that type of thing, and the sun in Capricorn gravitating more towards work. So it may occur that they start off together, and that together then they like if they can recognize. So this is why I don't say opposite suns are necessarily an issue, because if one partner is staying home raising the family and one partner is out and working and that works for them, right? Then you're both doing your sons and they're in harmony and they work together. Now keep in mind, in as we talked about in the oppositions in synastry video, if you have an opposition in synastry in the composite, it turns into one of the squaring signs. So if you have Cancer and Capricorn suns, right? Then you're going to have Aries and Libra, one of them as the composite sun, depending on which one, you know, depending on which way the chart is going. So, given that, right, either then it turns into the relationship, the Aries relationship, right, of the strength in the relationship as a whole, or the harmonizing of the two in constantly happening, constantly having to relate to two different worlds, right? So it's interesting to look at a composite in that regard. But this isn't a video on composites, just something to be aware of. So the key here is: are they going in different directions? But are those directions also going to be harmonized, right? So is it okay with the couple that they do that? Because if somebody's like, "Hey, I don't want to work. I actually want to stay at home, raise kids," and the other person's like, "I actually do want to work," and like, say, "Okay, we can have kids, but I want to still have a job, or I want to build a business or whatever," right? It sounds like they're on opposite ends, but they're not. It's just if they can do that in harmony, and then I would actually look at the composite to figure out what that harmony would actually look like from that relationship perspective. Okay, then we also have the nodes, number 7. So um, the nodes I find to be rather important because if you've listened to number 44 nodes video, my introduction to nodes, or you have my nodal path course, the the idea here, right, is you're probably going to both be coming in from a comforted south node perspective, and you're going to experience opportunities to tap into getting out of your comfort zone with the north node. And so together, right, how do you support each other in taking each other's path to activating the north node and bringing that down to the south? So somebody has a Libra South node and Aries North node. The partner might want to ask that other ask their partner, the one who has the North node and Aries, what are the things that you want to do, right? So you're helping the person to not just defer to their partner all the time, for example. Um, and so finding ways of being able to 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 support one another in what it takes to get outside of your comfort zone from a nodal path perspective. And then I like to look at, are there any planets at the bendings? So the bendings are the square of the nodes, um, because that's going to be key to activating the nodal path. And if in synastry there's a synastry or conjunction right at the bendings or an opposition at the bendings, that's also indicative because one partner's planet may be a key planet to helping the other partner activate the north node. So pretty important here with living and activating the nodal path. Okay. All right. So number 8 is looking at the 4th and 10th houses. This axis, the 4th and 10th axis, of course, the 4th house is generally associated with home and family, and the 10th house generally associated with career. However, the 4th and 10th axis also parents, your parents, your partner's parents, and the some of the things, depending on how much rapport I have with the couple that I'm talking to, right? We may look at, okay, well, what's so there's looking at the person's home life, the person's career, and seeing if they're similar or different from their partner and how to relate them in either situation. And if I have enough rapport, um, if they saw their parents very different from one another, right? Or so, for example, let's say they're just the squaring signs, right? So let's say one has Aries on the 4th and Libra on the 10th. The other one has Cancer on the 4th, Capricorn on the 10th, natural wheel. Then it may be important to help them realize that that forms effectively a square between how each saw their parents. And that can play a role with the home and career experiences. That can also play a role with how they want to be parents together if they want to have kids, right? So there's quite a number of things that I can dig into, and it gets pretty deep when you start looking at the axis, the 4th and 10th. And so, if I don't have enough rapport necessarily, or I don't necessarily need to for them, or they don't want to have kids or anything like that, I may just look at home and career. But this is a very important axis, and it's actually pretty much just as important as looking at the ascendant and descendant, which you would, well, we'll get to in terms of how the partner perception in a couple slides here. Okay, so number 9 is Saturn. I like Saturn for long-term potential, long-term stability, especially if one of the, well, if you have synastry with Saturn on both sides, even better. So if somebody's personal planet, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, sits on the other person's Saturn, um, I'll even look at the major aspects, mainly conjunction, opposition, square, trine. I'll look at sextile and inconjunct with Saturn too, but for different reasons. The conjunction, opposition, square, trine. If a personal planet is doing that with a partner Saturn, um, okay, probably pretty good. There's things that we need to work through in each of those situations, depending on what planet it is. And if it's, I mean, a sextile, probably not as much of a thing. I mean, I'll look at it, but not much of a big deal. If it's an inconjunct, I do want to pay more attention to it because it might be the adjustment that's needed for the stability and the long-term potential to occur. So I'd be very curious what that personal planet is, that would be in conjunct to partner Saturn. And the other thing is tight aspects here can actually feel restrictive, or especially if it's the sun sitting on the Saturn, it could actually be like the person feels not good enough. So the person whose Saturn is being sit on, so to speak. So Saturn Sun conjunction in synastry, you could have a situation where the person whose Saturn it is doesn't feel good enough, right? The sun, the light of the other person shining on where this person might feel restricted. Um, Having said that, it can also be indicative of long-term stability and potential, because of what Saturn is able to do there. And then I like to find a. It's not a requirement, but I like to find a strong Saturn aspect on both sides. So, if somebody's moon, if a partner's moon is, let's say, conjunct partner Saturn, and if the person whose Saturn it is actually has maybe say their Mars squaring their partner Saturn, so some sort of personal planet making some sort of major aspect to Saturn with the partner, to just help, because Saturn brings things into Earth, right? So the idea is it's connecting spirit and then opening up to Earth and bringing things into Earth. You can do that with Jupiter too. You can do it with Jupiter too from the perspective of going back up to spirit. So sometimes personal planet connections to Jupiter in synastry can actually refer to a more spiritual path being involved in a relationship as well. There's not a hard and fast rule with Saturn or Jupiter. This is just it's something to pay attention to, because where the stability and the long-term potential would come from would be working through any of those potential limitations that Saturn could bring up. Okay, so pretty significant there. The next one, number 10, is partner perception. So right now I have an example of one chart on the inside, one chart on the outside. So an example synastry chart. I would look at this and then I would also flip it so that the outer chart becomes the inner chart and the inner chart becomes the outer chart. And then we're looking at the inner chart and we're saying, okay, how does that person perceive their partner? And there's really three things that I look at. One is where the sun comes in. So here the example is the sun of the partner is coming in onto the 10th. The so that so for example, that partner might that person might see their partner as a leader or as an authority figure, even more 10th house. um then I also want to look at the ascendant, where the partner's ascendant comes in. So here it's the 12th. That can give me a little bit of an indication as to whether they see who the person is being or not, and how they perceive who the person is being. So more the sun is like how you're going to perceive your partner, how your partner enters your chart, how you would naturally perceive your partner to be. Whereas the ascendant is, okay, given who the partner is and who the partner actually is, how do you actually see that, right? So they're slightly different. One is how you would naturally see the partner, and then the other one is how do you see how well do you see the partner for who they already are. The ascendant coming into the 12th, they might not actually see who the person really is. It might, because it could be hidden from view with the unconscious of the 12th, and they may need to be reminded by their partner a little bit more about what their partner can do, um, and who their partner is. And then I look at the descendant of the inner chart. That's actually often the first one that I look at, because if I'm doing a natal reading, I'm definitely looking at that. And that's because the descendant and the full axis, the ascendant to the descendant. If the ascendant is how they perceive themselves, the descendant, of course, is how they perceive their partner, and generally partners in general after consummating a relationship. So that's kind of the overarching view of things. The interesting thing too that I'll sometimes look at, but not really in a relationship reading, is how someone perceives um, their exes, which is still seventh house. Okay, just to figure out, hey, how harmonized is the sign that's on the descendant. The other thing is I'll look at Do they realize that the sign that's on the ascendant, yes, they perceive themselves to be that person. How well have they harmonized who they perceive themselves not to be, which is the sign on the descendant? I'll look at that too. And then if you talk about if somebody has either met or known about their ex's new partner, or their current partner's exes, those actually are a first house projection. So those those actually would look at the ascendant. So I'm asking, if I'm working with somebody, especially if I'm working with somebody to help find a partner, or if we're diving into taking an existing relationship to a whole nother level, which it rarely comes up in a relationship reading at this point because we spend a lot of time on personal planets. We spend a lot of time on how to interact, how to relate the energy to the personal planets. This type of depth doesn't really come up in a relationship reading. But somebody who's having a hard time finding a partner, I spent a lot of time asking these other questions because it really digs into how well the ascendant and the descendant are harmonized. Okay. And um, so those are some additional bonus things that you can dive into. Number 11 is the first 6 months. So when I'm looking at synastry, I have to recognize that they are generally perceiving the partner to be their ideal partner for the first 6 months of the relationship, give or take. It's kind of it's not a on and then off thing. It's more of a gradual. The way I like to perceive it when I say the composite starts picking up is it's like you're on two different lanes of a road, and the two lanes start merging into one. Right. So it's not generally speaking, it's not an immediate thing, but they're coming closer and closer and closer together until now the car that was on one side and the car that was on the other are now actually driving in the same lane. And so during the time that that's occurring, during the time that you're getting ready to drive in the same lane, the ideal is being seen really for those first 6 months. And then the composite is when you're really driving together. Now the composite is the energy of the relationship itself. That does not rule out the synastry at that point. The synastries are still in play. I find that looking at when the composite's active, right, synastries are still important. When the synastries are just getting started, the composite is great to know is coming, but it may not be as well defined. It may not be as well as prominent in what's going on at that point because they're just seeing the their ideal partner in each other at that point, and the relationship from a conscious awareness may not necessarily be as evident, right? So for somebody who has been dating for longer than 6 months, it's less about the time period though. It's more about how well have the two roads come together, right? So that you're operating from so that you're also building upon the composite. So if we look at, let's say somebody has an opposition in synastry, if they have opposite Mercuries, well, obviously the composite Mercury will be one of the squaring signs. How well is the higher expression of that squaring sign Mercury in play in the relationship? Or is the energy still bouncing between the two ends of the opposition in its lower expression? Right. So if it's been elevated to a higher expression, great. Right. So I'm talking to in this video more like I'm talking to other astrologers, or I'm talking to people who have a depth in astrology. Right. In a reading, I'm keeping this all super simple, and we're going to the depth that that a couple can take. Right. So I'm going to what's going to help them relate together based on what they need. And of course, if I'm looking at their charts, I can basically deduce where to take it, right, to help them get the most effect. Okay. The number 12, I talked about in video 35. That's the idea of going from the fifth house to the seventh house, and then to the eighth house. And that's the idea that we meet our partner from the sign on the fifth. We consummate the relationship and date our partner from the sign on the seventh, the descendant. And then seventh and eighth together basically act like they're blended to ultimately be the relationship and then marriage. And so the key here is if somebody came to me and they just now started dating, they bring their partner on the relationship reading, they just started dating. Maybe they crossed a fifth to seventh boundary. Maybe they consummated their relationship already. Maybe they're actually still operating from fifth house energy, though. So I have to assess that. What I'm looking for mostly is how similar and different are the signs on the fifth, seventh, and eighth houses of each of the two people in the relationship, right? Because if one person is starting off like kind of like more like Sag on the fifth, like they're just going to go for it, right? But then um, maybe they have Aquarius in the seventh, and maybe they have Capricorn in the seventh, depending on whether it's intercepted sign or not. Um, which is much more slower, much more detached, much more like Capricorn would be more tangible, Aquarius would be more detached. Very different than a Sag on the fifth. So I would have to assess, like, okay, did you guys realize there's a shift that occurs? And if they picked up on the shift, it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that there's no longer any attraction. It means the energy is now operating from a different house in the chart, and to be aware of it. Likewise, if somebody has, say, more of a uh, let's say more of a not slower but more grounded, like an earth sign on the fifth, right? So if they have, let's say, Taurus on the fifth, right, maybe then they have Cancer on the seventh, and so that it might be slow to get started, but then maybe they want, so Cancer on the seventh, right, Leo on the eighth. At that point, maybe at that point it's like, hey, do you know that, hey, this is slow, and you're being methodical, and you're making you're taking your time together, but this person, you got Cancer on the seventh, Leo on the eighth. Yeah, it's possible that you want to have a family. It's also possible that you want to have a really nice wedding. uh, I mean, and a marriage that helps you to achieve your goals and the ways that you want to express yourself in the world, and then bring that up to the couple to talk through that. Because what may happen in that scenario is the beginning, where it was slow and methodical. Once they actually do, right, start getting serious in their relationship, things can move a little bit faster and a little bit more extravagant. And it's like, wait, what happened here? Right? Sometimes people refer to things as like the honeymoon phase and all that. Well, it's not really the honeymoon phase. You're there is other ways there are other ways of explaining this, but from an astrological perspective, what's going on here is the energy is shifting between the fifth, the seventh, and the eighth. So a very important one to pay attention to, both from a meeting perspective and a dating perspective, right? Because if you're not aware of how what those three signs are and how they play out, you won't be aware of the starting phase when you meet somebody, and then the actual dating and the ultimate relationship, right? You won't be aware of the changes that would occur. And it's important to talk about that, together. I mean, so those are the 12 of these things that I look for in synastry. Okay. And if you want more information on this, visit avatarattraction.com or schedule a reading. I'll put a link in the description below. You can get my book, Avatar Attraction. There's a whole section where I dive way deeper in the astrology of being able to meet your partner and being able to talk through the things that you necessarily would want to talk about in growing and cultivating a relationship. So if this is a topic of interest to you, I highly encourage you to visit avatarattraction.com or schedule a reading. The reading doesn't have to be like if you're single right now and you're looking for a partner, I could still look at that for you and give you some ideas for how to bring that partner in, or you could just get the book. If you're in a relationship already, then generally what I like to do is I like to do natal readings with each person first, and then a relationship reading. If you've already had natal readings done, you think you guys both understand your natal charts fairly well, then schedule a relationship reading. We still briefly review the natal chart in that anyway, and then also get the book, because there's really good topics to talk about in terms of how to relate together. So if you do have any questions or comments about this, please put them below. If you like this video and would like to see more like it, please subscribe. And as always, aloha, ahui ho. I'll talk with you again soon. Take care.